Hello there. Today I've put together a video showing how I made this Mandalorian jumpsuit that I currently have on, and I hope you enjoy the process. I will be doing a review at the end of the video to tell you my thoughts on the project, um, but otherwise, enjoy. So one more little note before I get started. I actually used two different charm patterns to make this outfit. I used the top of the Maria dress and I used the bottom of the Jane set. So those are two individual patterns that you can buy from Charm Patterns. I don't work for them. I'm not sponsored by them. I just really love the patterns because they're really adjustable. So anyway, if you want to make the set, that is what I used, and here's how I did it. Okay, so as always, we're going to start out by ironing our fabric. A little side note, I realized at this moment that my iron had completely died. It would not heat up. So I went and bought a new one, but at this point, I hung up my fabric and I used a steamer to get out as much wrinkles as I could. So here I'm laying out the pants pattern, and I'm going to be extending the crotch by 1 inch. So in order to do this, I pinned the pattern to the fabric and then I cut across the cut line where you would add or remove inches. And then I used a ruler and made sure that it was 1 inch on both ends of where I cut, and then repinned the bottom portion of the pants so that when I cut it out, it will have that extra inch. And this allowed me to keep the pants pieces aligned. And then I made sure that I repeated the same process for the back of the pants. And here I am just pinning the side pieces of the bodice down and the sleeve pieces. And I'm going to cut those as normal. But when I get to the bodice front and the bodice back, I'm actually going to remove the seam allowance on the back of the pattern and add seam allowance to the front of the pattern, because I'm moving the zipper from the back to the front. So here you can see I'm just marking out what my seam allowance would be, and I'm moving the pattern piece over so that it's on the fold, but it doesn't have that extra seam allowance. And then I will add pieces as I've measured 5/8 to the edge of that front bodice piece. And instead of cutting it on a fold, I will cut 2 pieces. And once I had all those pieces put together appropriately, then I pinned them to the fabric and I cut out all of my pieces. Made sure to cut notches. I have 2 sets of scissors. I actually use the purple scissors for the paper and then use my silver scissors for the fabric because I don't want to dull my fabric on the paper. Did I say fabric? I meant I don't want to dull my scissors, my fabric scissors on the paper. Anyway, next I attached by pinning the bodice front to the side front and the back to the side back at all the curved pieces, so the princess seams. And then you'll see I actually snip along part of the curve to allow it to open up and align properly. Just keep your notches lined up when you do this so that it doesn't get out of whack. Then I drafted my pockets. So I started by making a 5/8 inch seam allowance on the edge of the paper, and I marked that so that I knew I was having an even seam allowance down the edge of the pocket. And then I measured the width of my hand, and I added 1 inch. This allows me to be able to slip my hand in my pocket without it catching, and that's what I marked. Then I just kind of eyeballed the shape that I wanted for the pocket, and I made sure that my phone would fit in it. I really hate when I bend down or I sit down and my phone falls out of my pocket. So then when I cut it on the fabric, I realized I wanted it a little bit deeper, so I went ahead and marked that on the fabric so that my phone will be all the way below where the pocket opening is. This does make the pockets really deep, so if you're putting anything other than your phones in there, you have to reach way down, but it keeps my pocket from losing my phone, which has happened multiple times. Now here I actually took this carbon paper and my battery actually died on my computer while I was recording and I didn't realize. So what I did was I took carbon paper and I folded it in half and put it between the pieces of my pants so that I could copy on top of it where the dart is. I just traced it out with a little tool. I don't have it by me, but it's got like a little ball at the end, and I traced out the dart so that that carbon copy printed on both sides of my pattern piece in the exact same spot. So then I could make my darts without having any error. So here's, you can see I'm doing the carbon paper, but then it just cuts. So then I moved on because I realized that I also didn't cut out my lining pieces yet. So here you can see I'm just cutting out the lining pieces the exact same as I cut out the rest of the bodice pieces. I'm just not cutting sleeves for it. Then I'm pinning the bodice lining together and I'm going to stitch that right away. And I do it just the same as I did the bodice. Here I showed I actually, when I snip, I'm only snipping about 1/4 of an inch deep into the edge of the fabric. That way the snip doesn't go through where my seam is going to be. Then I moved on over to the pants and I zigzagged all the edges of the pants except for the waistline. The waistline will be zigzagged later after I attach the bodice to the pants. I did forget to video record where I stitched the pockets to the pants. So what I meant to do was to zigzag all the way around the pocket and then straight stitch the pocket to the pants. However, what I did was I straight stitched the pocket to the pants, then zigzagged all the way down the pant leg, including the edge of the pocket. Then I went back and zigzagged around the pocket. So that's what I did versus what I should have done. I aligned the notch on the pants with the top of the pocket so that I could line it up on both sides easily. So after all that zigzagging, then I sewed the darts. So the pants have darts at the waistband. So I started at the waistband and sewed with a straight stitch down to the point of the dart. And then you take the strings, because you leave strings hanging. You take the strings and you tie them in a knot at the point of the dart, and that will help hold the shape of the pants. Just as I show there. Get a hold of the string. So now I'm going to sew the seam line on the sides, so the front of the pants to the back of the pants, and I show here that I've marked the back of the pants with a B so that I know which one's the front and which one's the back. And also, just in case you're wondering, the audio got messed up where I was describing all of this, and so I had to re-record. That's what this is. Um, anyway, so you're gonna sew when you stitch, you're going to sew from the waistline down and around the pocket and then down the remainder of the leg. And I always clip right at the corner of where the pocket meets at the top and the bottom. And this allows, when you press your seams, for the pocket to move freely. And that way it doesn't create bulging and puckering where there shouldn't be any. And then I'm gonna just stitch down all that, like I said, start at the waist and then go down and go around the pocket and then finish the rest of the leg. And I do that on both sides. I think I only show one side here. And then from that, we are now going to sew the inside seam of the leg. So we are going to bring the front of the leg to meet the back of the leg on the same side. And we're going to sew from the crotch down to the bottom of the pants. You're going to make sure that you line up all the notches. So line up all those notches when you're pinning and then stitch down that inside seam. And then I repeated that process for the other leg. So now we're going to do the crotch seam. So we're going to take one side of the pant leg and flip it inside out. And we're going to insert that leg into the other one. Well, I guess we flipped it right side out and we're inserting into the outside, the one that's wrong side out. I can't do words today, they're not working. And then when we do the crotch seam, we are going to sew from the back of the crotch around and to the front. And I'm going to stop at the notch because I'm going to use that notch as a guide for my zipper, for where my zipper is going to stop on the front. So as I'm stitching it, my stitches did get a little bit wonky, and so I had to go back and back stitch and then sew forward and make sure that I'm keeping it on my correct seam allowance, and then I took out those extra stitches later so that I could press my seam open. So make sure that when you're doing the curve, you're keeping the proper amount of seam allowance because you don't want it to get bigger or smaller because that's going to mess up the look of your garment. And then once I was done with that, I finished the bottom of the legs. So I had left a 2-inch gap on the outside seams from the bottom. And I just folded seam allowances under and stitched those down to be able to create a split at the bottom of the leg. Because it just gives my calves a little bit more room. I got thick legs, y'all. You don't even know. And I'm just doing the other one. And I do this on both pant legs, of course. And then for the hem on the bottom of the leg, I did a double fold hem, and I just folded it a 1/4 inch and then another 1/4 inch and stitched that down. So that is my seam allowance, or I should say that's my seam finishing on the bottom of the pants. Oh, I guess, sorry, 1/2 inch, not a 1/4 inch. I was thinking a 1/4 inch on the sleeve. So then I stitched the bodice together because I hadn't done that earlier. And I did it on the princess seams, so the front side to the front, and then the back to the back, just like I did for the lining, because I stitched the lining already, but for some reason forgot to stitch the bodice. Well, how was that it? And then I stitched the shoulder seams at the top here. And then I did the last 2 steps. So I did this, I stitched the side seams and the shoulder seams on the bodice lining because I hadn't done that yet. And then for the sleeves, I did the 1/4 inch double fold that I had mentioned that I thought I did at the bottom of the pants, but I apparently did it on the sleeves. And then once I finished that double fold hem on the sleeve, then I stitched the short side of the sleeve, so the armpit section, this really short bit right here, I stitched that part together next. And then once I stitched that, I remembered that I hadn't yet gathered the top of the sleeve so that it will fit into the arm side. So I had to do that. So I just basted in some stitches by hand and then pulled it between the notches so that it would fit into the arm side hole. Then I turned the sleeve right side out, and I kept the bodice wrong side out, and I slipped the sleeve into the arm's eye, and I lined up the notches and spread the gathers, and I stitched it down. So I stitched all the way around the sleeve, and then I did the other one. And I didn't record it, but I stitched the lining of the bodice to the bodice just at the neckline. And then I'm going to go around and I'm going to clip all of the curves. So all the curves around the neckline and around the armhole, I'm going to clip all those curves just short of the stitches. So I'm not going to clip through the stitches. I'm just going to clip just inside the stitches, so about 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to press everything. So I have a tailor's ham here. That's not the ham-shaped one. I have 2 of them. That one's actually for sleeves, but I couldn't find my ham. And I pressed the collar toward the lining. And then when I got to the armhole, I pressed those seams toward the bodice. And the reason I did those toward the bodice is because I'm going to stitch the lining in, and I want those seam allowances to be inside between the lining and the bodice top. And then I pressed all of the other seam allowances open. And I had to do some additional snips so that it would lay properly when I was pressing it in the princess seam curve. And I'm just holding the sleeve ham so that it will create a surface for me to press on with that iron so it'll press open. And then I flip the bodice right side out and I press the neckline down. And this makes it so that you don't have to have a top stitch here. Normally you would stitch, which I did, but I didn't record it apparently. But you're going to do a stitch on the lining side with everything open. I'll have to describe that in a different video. But here I am doing the armholes on the lining. So I'm clipping about every 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to press that seam allowance under and pin it to the sleeve at the arm's eye, because I'm going to hand stitch around the armhole since I didn't make a lining for the sleeve. And that allows it to be stitched without having all those little frayed bits sticking out. If you're wondering about all the clipping, all the 1/2 inch clippings that I do, that is to allow the curves to lay properly and to spread properly, especially around the armhole. The further in you clip, the bigger the armhole is. So if you don't, and there's where I'm hand stitching it, but if you don't clip it, it will not be big enough for movement. So then I stitch the bodice to the pants at the waistline, and I'm going to stitch that down with a straight stitch, and then I'm going to go back and zigzag the waistline to the bodice, just inside that seam allowance, and that keeps them together as one piece from then on. And then I went and I zigzagged everywhere that the zipper is going to line up with. So the front of the bodice, the front of the pants, and the inside of the front of the lining. And then my zipper was too long, so I actually took my lighter and melted, because it's a plastic zipper, I just melted and fused together at the bottom of where I needed the zipper to stop. And then I was able to clip off the excess. And this lighter, just in case you're wondering, it's a spark lighter. It's not like and it's rechargeable. It's not a flame lighter, but it makes it really easy to do these, and I like it for candles too. So just in case you're wondering what that is, it's a lighter. So there, I'm just going to cut off the excess from the zipper. And then I took a long piece of string, I put a knot at the end, and I used that to baste down my zipper. And I did that along both sides of the zipper. So I did it all the way down the zipper. And then for some reason, instead of basting the lining, I pinned it in place, and I wish I would have basted it, because if I had basted it, I wouldn't have had so much trouble with it misaligning when I was stitching the zipper, because I was trying to just have one straight line of seam instead of multiple seam pieces. I don't know how to phrase that. So there you can see I basted it on both sides of the zipper, or you will see me basting it on the other side of the zipper. You can see those long stitches. And then, like I said, for some reason I decided to pin the lining in place instead of basting it in place. When I get to the bottom of the lining, I actually also fold it under, and that way when I go to hand stitch the lining in place, it's already folded under and seamed down on that edge. I've had issues before where I didn't do that, and then I've accidentally sewn it down straight. It's a mess, and then you have to take out stitches and whatever. So now we're going to change to our zipper foot. And we're going to use this foot to stitch the zipper in place. So I'm going to zip up my zipper most of the way. I'm just going to leave a little bit of gap at the top. And I'm going to start sewing on, if I'm looking at it, I'm sewing on the left side of the zipper. And then I do about an inch to an inch and a half of of stitches down, and then I stop, and then I lift the foot and I move the zip part up to the top so that it's out of the way of my zipper foot. And then I put my foot back down and I keep stitching. And that's how you can make your seam straighter, because going around that zipper head sometimes gets wonky. So I keep saying zip, I sew all the way down the zipper side, and I remove those pins as I go. Obviously, you don't want to sew over the pins, you might break your needle. And then at the bottom, I carefully turned it so that I am sewing toward the zipper, and carefully advanced forward so that my needle went between the zip teeth so it doesn't get stuck. And then I also backstitched at the bottom, so that reinforces that bottom where the opening is. And then I continued turning it. After I did those back stitches, I turned it again and sewed back up on what would be the right side if I was looking at it the original way, but now it's upside down, so it's still the left side of the zipper. And so I sewed all the way to the top. And I did the same thing. Once I got a couple inches from the top, I moved the zipper head back to the other side of my needle and then kept stitching. And I was having trouble with my lining there because I didn't baste it down. But I got it eventually, so that it was just one seam instead of multiple pieces of seam. And then now that you're done with all that, you are ready to hand stitch the lining in place, and it's all done. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I do have a few notes about this project. If I do this again, I'm actually going to bring the bust line in just a little bit at the top. Like, it fits everywhere except the very top. So I'm probably going to just bring this in a little bit so that it doesn't gape at the top. And then also, because I have thick thighs, I had to add some inches in the legs. So the pictures I took before I added the inches, but I did go back later that day and cut open the seam on the inside of the leg. And then I cut 2 strips of fabric that were 23 inches long, and I made them tapered. So they were 3 inches at the top and they came down to 1.5 inches. And then I added that 1 strip to each leg, and then I had a 1/2 inch seam allowance on that, so that gave me a couple extra inches in the thighs, but not too much anywhere else, and that allowed them to fit better. So now I can sit comfortably, because they were pretty tight when I went to sit, and I was afraid I was going to bust a seam. And it wasn't because I did the wrong size for the pants, it's just that I'm built differently than other people. So my waist, the top, I used a size 16, and the bottom I used a size 16, and it fits perfectly at the waist. The only problem is the legs. So in the future, if I make it again, I will just add that couple inches and taper it from the start instead of adding another strip of fabric. But it doesn't look bad the way I added it in the inner leg. It's not really noticeable unless you're looking for it. So yeah, that's my notes on this project. So other than that, I absolutely love it, and you'll probably see it again in the future. So that's all I have today. So I hope you have a wonderful day.